What does a vampire king do when his bloodline dies with his son? He mourns in silence and shadow. For Caspian Volov, immortal sovereign of the Night Court, that mourning has become a century-long ritual of regret. Every year on this night, he returns to Blackwood Mausoleum to stand before the grave of Matteo, the son he drove away. But tonight, the rain-slicked marble reflects more than his ancient grief. He finds a waitress collapsed at his son's tomb, her worn uniform soaked through, clutching the hand of a shivering boy. When lightning splits the sky, the child looks up, and Caspian sees what should be impossible, the violet eyes of the Volov bloodline burning in a half-human child. The king's pilgrimage to honor the dead is about to ignite a war for the living and force him to become the one thing he never learned to be, a grandfather. The rain was a living thing at Blackwood Mausoleum. It wasn't the gentle spring rain of the countryside. It was a punishing, relentless downpour that hammered the Gothic spires and turned the gravel paths into rivers of mud. This rain was King Caspian Volov's only witness. He stood before the tomb, a monument of polished black granite carved with a name that felt like a blade in his chest, Matteo Volov. Below it, dates that marked a life cut impossibly short, a cruel joke at the expense of an immortal father. Caspian, sovereign of the Night Court, commander of shadows from the city's glittering towers to the ancient crypts beneath, could bend nations to his will. He could end a life with a thought, reshape fortunes with a whisper, and walk through walls of fire unscathed. But he could not reverse the stubborn finality of this stone. He had commissioned this mausoleum himself, ensuring it stood in the most secluded corner of the cemetery, far from prying mortal eyes. It was his sanctum of sorrow. Tonight marked the 7th anniversary. 7 years since his son, his only child, his half-human heir, had been murdered in what the human world called a tragic car accident. Matteo, who had rejected his father's throne of eternal night for the fleeting, fragile warmth of humanity. Caspian placed a single black rose against the sealed bronze door. He did not cry. Tears had abandoned him centuries ago. He simply ached, a vast, echoing void that all his power could not fill. He closed his eyes, letting the rain wash over him, the silence of the dead settling like a shroud. But the silence was broken. A sound. Soft. Human. A muffled sob. Caspian's eyes snapped open, glowing faintly violet in the darkness. His enhanced hearing had caught it instantly, the unmistakable rhythm of a mortal heartbeat, fast and frightened. No one comes here, he thought, his jaw tightening. The cemetery keepers were well-paid and well-charmed to ensure his solitude. He moved, not walking, but gliding, a shadow-given form, drifting between the weeping angels and rain-soaked headstones. And then he saw her. She was kneeling beside the mausoleum, her back to him. Her coat was threadbare, a washed-out denim jacket that clung to her thin frame, soaked through and offering no protection from the storm. Her shoulders shook with sobs she was trying desperately to suppress. He was furious. A trespasser. A mortal, defiling this sacred ground. But it was the third presence that froze him in place. A little boy stood beside her. No older than 5, perhaps. He was dressed in denim overalls over a white shirt, his small hand gripping the woman's arm. He wasn't crying. He was simply staring at the black stone with an expression far too solemn for a child his age. "It's okay to be sad, sweetheart," the woman whispered, her voice cracking as she wiped her face with the back of her hand. This is where your papa rests." Caspian's heart, long dormant, a relic of his mortal life, seemed to stop. The woman, sensing the sudden shift in the air, the drop in temperature, the weight of an ancient presence, looked up. She saw him, a tall figure silhouetted against the storm, impossibly still. He wore a tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than her entire year's rent. His face was pale, carved from marble, and achingly beautiful in a way that was terrifying. I'm sorry," she stammered, scrambling to her feet and pulling the boy behind her. We'll go." The gates were open. I didn't think anyone. Caspian ignored her. He took one step forward, his gaze locked on the child. The boy looked back at him, unafraid. And then, as lightning split the sky, illuminating the graveyard in stark white brilliance, Caspian saw them. The eyes. Not brown. Not human. Violet. Deep, luminous violet, the unmistakable mark of the Volov bloodline. The world tilted. He didn't need a blood test. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. He could see the ghost of his son in the shape of the boy's face, the curve of the jaw, the high cheekbones. But more than that, he could hear the child's heartbeat, a rapid, warm rhythm pulsing against the cold night. Thump-thump, thump-thump. And beneath it, something else. A faint, dormant hum, the echo of his own ancient power, sleeping in the boy's veins. The woman pulled the child fully behind her, her body language screaming protection. Please, we don't want any trouble. Caspian's voice emerged low, textured like gravel wrapped in velvet, cutting through the rain. Who are you? I'm Melissa, she said, voice shaking. This is Rowan. We're just paying our respects. Respects. Caspian's control was slipping. The hollow ache was gone, replaced by a roaring, disbelieving fire. To whom? To Matt, Melissa said, clutching Rowan tighter. My boyfriend. He died 7 years ago. Caspian's mask of control fractured. Matt? The pathetic, ordinary human name his son had chosen for his secret life. His name, Caspian said, stepping into a patch of pale moonlight that broke through the clouds, his features becoming lethally clear, was not Matt. It was Mateo. Mateo Volov. Melissa's face drained of all color. She had never told anyone Matt's real last name. He had made her promise. Caspian knelt within human speed, bringing himself eye level with the child half hidden behind Melissa's legs. He never broke his gaze from the boy. And you, he whispered, the words hanging in the rain-soaked air, are his son. Melissa's breath hitched. Every maternal instinct screamed danger. This man was not just a grieving relative. His stillness was unnatural. His eyes held an ancient, predatory intelligence that belonged in nightmares, not graveyards. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, her voice trembling. She tugged Rowan's hand. Come on, baby. We're leaving. His name was Mateo, Caspian repeated, his voice quiet but commanding. It vibrated in her bones, stopping her retreat. You worked at the Riverside Diner. He told you he was a music student. He lived in a walk-up apartment on the south side. He told you his family would never accept you. Melissa's blood ran colder than the rain. How could you know that? Caspian rose slowly to his full, imposing height. Because I am his father. The admission landed like a physical blow. Melissa stared at him, recognition dawning with horror. This was the man Matt had painted as a monster. The controlling, dangerous patriarch he had fled. Looking at the man now, his inhuman stillness, his ancient eyes, she believed every warning. He told me you disowned him, she whispered, half accusation, half confusion. He told you a version of the truth, Caspian said, his face an iron mask of control. Thunder rolled overhead. The rain intensified, turning the cemetery into a blur of gray and black. Rowan shivered, a violent tremor running through his small body. Caspian's gaze flicked to the child, and his expression softened, just a fraction. The boy is cold. Where's your car? Oh, over by the main gate, Melissa said, pointing with a shaking hand. A Honda. Caspian didn't need to see it to know. It won't start. The battery is likely dead in the storm. Melissa's heart sank. He was right. That car was held together with prayer and duct tape. She was stranded in a graveyard, in a storm, with her son and a man who terrified her to her core. Come, Caspian said. It was not a request. He turned and began walking toward the gates. A sleek black limousine sat waiting, engine purring with supernatural silence. A driver, massive, stone-faced, held an umbrella by the rear door. Melissa hesitated. "We're not getting in that car." Caspian paused, his hand on the door. He looked back at her, and for one heartbeat, the ice in his eyes cracked, revealing a chasm of grief so deep it took her breath away. "Ms. Melissa," he said quietly, "you are standing in a rainstorm at my son's grave with my grandson. You are grieving. I am also grieving. Whatever you believe of me, I will not see my son's child freeze to death in the dark." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Get in the car." The logic was brutal, irrefutable. Clasping Rowan to her chest, Melissa slid onto leather seats softer than anything she'd ever touched. The interior was silent, warm, and smelled faintly of leather and old books. The door closed with a whisper. And as the limousine pulled away from Blackwood Mausoleum, Melissa realized with cold certainty her life had just changed forever. The rain hadn't stopped when the limousine's taillights faded into the black horizon. Melissa could still see them in her mind, glowing like the eyes of a predator in the dark. The man, Caspian Volov, sat across from her in perfect stillness, his profile carved by the dim interior lights. Rowan slept with his head in her lap, small fingers curled around the frayed edge of her jacket. Every bump of the road felt like a heartbeat. Hers, not his. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped into a nightmare wrapped in velvet. The car moved too smoothly, too silently. Even the rain against the windows seemed to hush itself in his presence. When she finally gathered the courage to speak, her voice came out small. "Where are you taking us?" "Somewhere safe," Caspian said. His tone was neither kind nor cruel, simply inevitable. Melissa didn't believe in safety anymore. Not since Mateo's death. Not since the night Rowan woke screaming about the men in black coats who came to the window whispering his father's name. The limousine turned off the main road. Headlights cut through a field of fog. But when Melissa looked out the back window, her stomach dropped. Another pair of lights appeared behind them. Headlights, smaller, faster. Caspian's gaze flicked to the reflection before she could even speak. "They've found you." "Who?" "The ones your son feared." The car surged forward. The driver didn't ask questions. He pressed the accelerator until the engine growled. The other car followed, closer now, its beams slicing through the storm. Melissa clutched Rowan tighter. "How do they know where we are?" "Because they always do," Caspian murmured. He turned his head, eyes narrowing. "The Obsidian Order has been hunting what remains of my bloodline for decades. They believe vampire-human hybrids are abominations, a corruption of the pure bloodlines. They've been exterminating half-bloods since the Treaty of Shadows collapsed 50 years ago. You led them to the grave." "I didn't." "You didn't know," he said, not unkindly. "But ignorance doesn't shield you." The first gunshot shattered the back window. Glass sprayed across the seats. Rowan woke screaming. Caspian's eyes flared violet, the air around him trembling with a power she could feel but not name. "Hold him," he commanded. The limousine swerved, then screeched to a stop. Caspian stepped out into the rain like a shadow, leaving its body. The world seemed to bend around him, the storm bowed. He raised one hand, and the night answered. The pursuing car skidded sideways, slammed into a ditch, and was devoured by darkness. No sound. No explosion. Just absence. When he returned, rain beating and sliding from his coat like it feared to touch him, Melissa could barely breathe. What did you do?" "I ensured we would not be followed." He climbed back into the car, voice calm again. "We must move quickly. They won't stop." An hour later, the limousine rolled to a halt on the edge of the forest. Smoke thickened the air. Melissa's heart dropped before she even opened the door. Her trailer was burning. Flames licked the night sky, red and hungry. The storm did nothing to quench them. The rain only made the smoke heavier, blacker. She stumbled forward, barefoot in the mud, staring as everything she owned melted into ash. On the door, what remained of it, someone had painted a symbol in soot and blood. A circle, broken through the center by a jagged line. Caspian's expression darkened. The mark of the obsidian order. Melissa turned toward him, shaking. You said they were after you. They were, he said. Now they're after him. His eyes flicked to Rowan. The boy stared at the burning trailer with eerie calm. They found us, Mama. Melissa sank to her knees. Her whole world, her job, her home, her memories, was gone. We have nowhere to go. Caspian's coat swept the ground as he stepped closer, towering above her, the firelight reflected in his eyes like amethyst flame. You do, he said softly. You come with me. She looked up at him, soaked, shaking, desperate to find a lie in his face. And if I don't? He didn't hesitate. Then you die here. The words weren't a threat. They were prophecy. Melissa's throat tightened. Behind her, the trailer collapsed with a shriek of metal. The sound broke something in her. She stood, clutching Rowan. You'll keep him safe? Caspian's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. He is my grandson. His safety is my vow. For a moment, the wind shifted, blowing ash between them like snow. And in that strange silence, Melissa realized how utterly alone she was, except for the monster who mourned her son as his own. When she finally nodded, Caspian extended his hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was steady. The fire roared behind them as they turned toward the waiting car. The storm had become their only witness, and somewhere in the distance, the night itself seemed to breathe. Melissa glanced back once, watching the last of her life collapse into flame. Then she whispered, half to herself, half to the boy in her arms. We are not safe. Not anywhere. The limousine door closed, sealing the promise. And the chase, the one that began 7 years ago with Mateo's death, had only just begun. The city rose around them like a black cathedral of glass and steel, its towers clawing at the storm. The limousine glided through streets slick with rain, streetlights smearing gold against the windows. Melissa had never been this far downtown, never past the districts where the rent doubled with every block. Now she was staring at a skyline that looked like a dream dreamt by gods who loved sharp edges and mirrors. Caspian's voice broke the silence. The spire, he said, as if naming a kingdom. At first, she didn't see it. Then it appeared, an obsidian monolith stabbing upward from the heart of the city, its upper floors lost in low-hanging clouds. Lights pulsed within it like veins of living fire. It didn't look like a building. It looked like something that had grown there. The car entered a private tunnel beneath the tower. There were no guards, no keypads, no checkpoints, only a feeling, a shiver that ran through Melissa's bones, as though something unseen had weighed her soul and decided she could pass. When the doors opened, warm air greeted them, carrying the scent of rain-damp stone and jasmine. A woman in a black uniform bowed wordlessly. Her eyes were silver. Not gray silver. This way, Caspian said, leading them through halls of onyx and glass. The silence of the place was immense, broken only by the click of his shoes and the faint hum of unseen machinery. They stepped into an elevator. No buttons. No panel. Just a smooth wall of mirrored black. Caspian said one word, something in a language that rolled like thunder, and the elevator moved soundlessly upward. Melissa held Rowan close, her reflection a ghost beside his small, sleepy face. She couldn't tell how long they rose, but her ears popped twice before the doors opened. The penthouse was not what she expected. It was not cold or sterile. It breathed. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a kingdom of storm clouds and city lights. Flames flickered in a stone hearth. Velvet curtains the color of midnight framed the world beyond. Welcome to the lion's den, Caspian said quietly. Servants human, she thought, but not quite, appeared like mist. One lifted Rowan gently from her arms, another handed her a towel so soft it felt like water. They did not speak. They moved with the precision of shadows trained to serve eternity. Bathed, fed, and clothed, Caspian instructed. They are exhausted. Melissa wanted to argue, to say she didn't trust anyone here. But the warmth was intoxicating, and Rowan was half asleep again, his small face smudged with soot and fear. When they led him away down a corridor that smelled faintly of lavender, she followed. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. A bath drawn in marble. Water scented with cedar. The grime of smoke and fear washed from her skin. She was dressed in a robe that shimmered like moonlight. When she returned to the main room, Rowan sat on a thick rug before the fire, eating something that looked too delicate to be real. He laughed. A soft, pure sound. And then things moved. The spoon in his bowl lifted, wobbling in the air. A glass of milk rolled toward him without touching his hands. Melissa froze. The servants didn't flinch. Caspian stood near the window, watching. Rowan clapped, delighted. The air around him shimmered faintly, like heat above asphalt. "Stop," Melissa whispered. "Baby, stop." But he couldn't seem to. The spoon danced higher, spinning lazily, as though caught in an invisible current. Caspian's reflection watched them both in the window. "He is awakening." Melissa turned on him, trembling. "What's happening to him?" "What was always meant to happen," Caspian said. He stepped closer, and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice carried something almost like awe. "He is of my blood. The last of the Volov line. Power follows him like breath." "I don't want him to be like you," she said. Caspian's eyes flickered, faintly luminous. Neither did his father. And yet here he is. The spoon clattered to the floor. Rowan giggled, unaware of the storm tightening between them. Melissa knelt, pulling him close, feeling his heartbeat against her own. "He's just a child," she whispered. Caspian's gaze softened. For now. He turned back to the glass wall, hands clasped behind his back. The city burned below them, rivers of light moving through veins of rain-slick asphalt. His reflection hovered over it all, a figure both king and ghost. From this height, the world seemed fragile. But the boy's power, wild, innocent, was not. It pulsed through the air like distant thunder. Caspian could feel it humming beneath the penthouse floors, stirring the shadows, whispering to the ancient wards he'd bound centuries ago. He closed his eyes. There was beauty in it, yes, but also danger. The kind of power that invited predators. The kind that had already painted his grandson's home in ash. Behind him, Rowan laughed again, and a cluster of crystal beads from the chandelier drifted down, circling the boy's hands like fireflies. Melissa's breath caught in wonder. Caspian opened his eyes to the reflection of the two of them, the mortal and the child of night. His voice was quiet, almost tender. "The world will come for him," he said. "And when it does, this place will be the only thing between him and the dark." Melissa looked up at him, eyes filled with both fear and something new, something dangerous. "Then I guess the lion's den just became our cage." Caspian said nothing. He only watched as the boy, the last flicker of his dying bloodline, made the air dance with light. And somewhere deep in the tower, the wards shivered awake, as if the spire itself had begun to recognize its new heir. The spire never slept. Even in the deepest hours of night, its veins glowed faintly beneath the glass floors, pulsing like the heartbeat of some great creature dreaming below. Melissa wandered its corridors alone, the echo of her bare feet following her like a whisper she couldn't escape. She told herself she wasn't lost, only curious, but the truth was, she was searching. For answers. For the man she had loved, and the truth this place was built to hide. Caspian had disappeared hours ago, leaving her with silence and servants who bowed too low and spoke too softly. Rowan slept in a room so large it could have held her entire trailer. She couldn't rest. Every polished surface reflected Mateo's face, the ghost of him in every shadow. She turned a corner and stopped. A door stood before her, different from the others, made of iron, veined with silver symbols that pulsed faintly when she approached. The air around it felt colder. Beneath her palm, the metal thrummed like a heartbeat. The door opened without a sound. Inside was a chamber of light and silence. Shelves curved up the walls like ribs, filled not with books, but with glass orbs suspended in slow rotation, glowing softly in shades of blue and gold. The Royal Archives. She didn't need anyone to tell her. The air itself felt heavy with memory. She stepped closer. The nearest orb pulsed faintly when her hand hovered over it. Inside, shadows moved, a flicker, a shape, a voice. She shouldn't touch it. She knew that instinctively. But she did. The world tilted, and the room fell away. She was standing in another place. A vast hall lit by chandeliers that burned without flame. The same spire, but younger, alive with power. And there at the center, two figures stood facing each other. Caspian. And Matteo. Her heart lurched. Matteo was so young, his hair longer, his eyes brighter. But the tension between them filled the air like electricity before a storm. "You don't understand," Matteo said. "They'll kill her. They'll kill the child." Caspian's voice was a blade, measured, cold, aching beneath the surface. "You would throw away immortality for a human girl? For a mortal life? I would throw away 1,000 eternities if it means my son can live free," Matteo shot back. Melissa's breath caught. The word son echoed through her. Caspian's control cracked, just for a heartbeat. "You carry the blood of kings. You cannot simply vanish into the dust." "I already have," Matteo said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." Caspian's hand clenched at his side. "You think the High Council will ignore this? A hybrid child is an abomination in their eyes. If they find out—" "They won't," Matteo said. "Because I won't let them. You'll tell them I'm dead. You'll tell them I took my own life. And you'll mean it." The silence that followed was vast. Caspian stepped forward, eyes burning. "You ask me to mourn you in front of gods and monsters alike. To bury my son while he still breathes." Matteo's jaw tightened. "I'm asking you to love me enough to let me go." Caspian's voice broke, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through centuries. "You are my blood." "I'm also hers," Matteo said softly. "And his." He touched his chest. "If they ever learn that, they'll come for all of us. I won't let that happen." Melissa wanted to reach for him, to scream that he didn't have to hide, that she would have followed him anywhere. But the vision wasn't hers to change. It was a ghost, looping endlessly in glass. Matteo turned, walking toward the edge of the light. "Tell them I'm gone, Father. Let me be human." The orb flickered, and the world snapped back. Melissa was on her knees, gasping. The orb dimmed, its light fading to a soft, mournful glow. Behind her, a voice spoke. "You shouldn't be here." She turned. Caspian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, though the shadows beneath his eyes spoke volumes. "I saw him," she whispered. "I saw everything." He stepped closer, the weight of centuries in his slow movements. "That memory is not meant for mortal eyes." "Then why keep it?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why hold it here, locked away, if it hurts you so much?" Caspian's gaze dropped to the dark marble floor. "Because it is all I have left of him." Melissa rose unsteadily, anger and grief tangling in her chest. "You made him choose between his life and his family. He chose to protect you," Caspian said quietly. "He didn't leave because he hated me. He left because he loved you." The words broke something open inside her. Tears welled up, spilling hot down her face. "He loved both of us. And now he's gone." Caspian's voice softened, barely more than a whisper. "Not gone. Not entirely." His gaze turned toward the corridor where Rowan slept. "Part of him still breathes. Laughs. Defies me." Melissa laughed through her tears, a cracked, helpless sound. "That does sound like him." Something fragile shifted between them then. For the first time, she didn't see a monster in the marble tower, but a man tired, hollowed by regret, haunted by love he could never undo. Caspian extended his hand, not as a king, but as a father who had lost too much. "Come. The night grows long." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His skin was cold, but his touch was steady. As they walked from the archives, the orbs dimmed behind them, centuries of memory retreating into silence. And though neither spoke again, both knew the truth now burned between them like a single, unspoken promise. Mateo had given up everything so they could live. The cost of that love was carved into both their hearts, and neither would ever be free of it. The spire woke before dawn. Light had not yet touched the city, but already the tower hummed with movement, currents of energy threading through the walls like restless ghosts. Melissa woke to the sound of breaking glass. She ran. Rowan stood in the center of the sitting room, eyes wide, his small hands trembling. Around him, shards of crystal floated in the air, suspended like a frozen explosion. A maid knelt nearby, her breath coming in sharp, frightened gasps. The invisible pressure around her body bent the air, crushing inward. "Rowan!" Melissa shouted, her voice slicing through the hum. The boy turned toward her, tears streaking his cheeks. "I can't." The glass fell. The pressure broke. The maid collapsed, sobbing into the marble floor, alive but shaking. Caspian appeared in the doorway. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. His gaze took in the overturned furniture, the trembling child, the fear that clung to the air like smoke. His expression was unreadable. "Out," he said to the servants. They obeyed without hesitation, vanishing as silently as they had come. Melissa dropped to her knees beside Rowan, gathering him close. He didn't mean to. He was dreaming. Dreams can kill," Caspian said softly. She looked up at him, furious. "He's just a boy." Caspian's eyes, violet and ancient, met hers. "He is my grandson. And my blood does not yield to mercy. It demands control." He crossed the room and knelt before Rowan. The boy shrank back instinctively, hiding behind Melissa's shoulder. Caspian's voice softened, but the steel in it remained. "Look at me." Rowan hesitated, then met his gaze. "The power inside you is not evil," Caspian said. "It is simply hungry. If you let it feed without command, it will devour everything you love. Control is the only thing that separates us from the beasts." He stood, offering his hand to the child. "Come. It is time you learn." Melissa tried to protest, but the look he gave her was absolute. Not cruel, just inevitable. They moved to a vast chamber on the spire's upper level, open to the sky through high, arched windows. The city glittered far below, and in the center of the room stood a circle of runes etched in silver. Caspian gestured, and the circle flared to life. "Here, your power will not harm," he said. "Only teach." The lessons began. Caspian guided him with precision, voice low, every word deliberate. Again, he would say, as Rowan strained to lift a pebble from the floor, the air around him trembling with unseen pressure. "Do not force it. Shape it." Sometimes the boy succeeded, objects shivering into motion, hovering like held breath. Other times, his emotions spilled over, sending sparks crackling through the air. Caspian never flinched. He absorbed every failure with the stillness of stone. But Melissa watched from the edge of the room, her heart in her throat. The sight of Rowan's small body shaking under that intensity was too much. When Caspian raised his voice for the first time, she broke. "That's enough," she snapped, stepping into the circle. "He is a child, not a soldier." Caspian's eyes blazed, but his voice stayed calm. "And yet the world will treat him as a weapon the moment it learns he exists. If he cannot control the beast inside, the beast will eat him." Rowan flinched at the word beast. Melissa rounded on Caspian. "He doesn't need your fear. He needs your love." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick, electric. Then, slowly, Caspian turned to his grandson again. "Love will not save you from what you are," he said quietly. "But understanding might." Melissa's anger faltered. There was sorrow in his tone, deep, endless sorrow that sounded like truth. Rowan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I can try again," he whispered. Caspian nodded once. "Then begin." He placed a single feather on the floor between them, black, iridescent, impossibly delicate. "Lift it," he said. But not with anger. Not with fear. The storm obeys rage. The wind obeys calm. Rowan closed his eyes. The air stilled. The lights dimmed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the feather stirred, rising slowly, spinning on an unseen current. It didn't whip or shatter or burn, it floated. Melissa gasped. Caspian said nothing. But a quiet smile, brief, ghostly, touched his face. Rowan opened his eyes and laughed, the sound bright and pure, and the feather danced higher, glowing faintly in the half-light. When it drifted gently into his open palm, Caspian exhaled, as though he had been holding his breath for centuries. "You see," he murmured. "Control does not cage you. It frees you." Rowan beamed, and even Melissa couldn't help but smile, tears shining in her eyes. Caspian looked at them both, the mother who would die to protect her child, and the boy who might one day save or destroy them all, and for the first time in 100 years, something in him eased. Outside, dawn broke over the city, pale light spilling across the spire's glass walls. Inside, the last feather of night settled between them, weightless and whole. Caspian bent to retrieve it, his voice low, almost reverent. "Good," he said. "Now again." And as the feather rose once more, Melissa realized that for the first time since she'd entered this world of monsters and kings, the air no longer felt like a cage, it felt like possibility. The night beyond the spire was calm for once, too calm, as if the storm itself were holding its breath. Inside, shadows moved like living things across the marble floors, and the pulse of the tower seemed slower, heavier. Victor Kale stood at the edge of the city, staring up at the obsidian monolith that pierced the clouds. His reflection gleamed in the rain-slicked pavement, sharp, elegant, and wrong. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "The lion's den," he murmured. "Every beast has one weakness, its hunger." A figure emerged from the dark behind him, cloaked and cautious. Silas, Caspian's advisor. The man who had stood at the king's side for over a century. His posture carried the stiffness of loyalty and the tremor of betrayal. "You're late," Victor said. His voice was smooth, the kind that could cut silk or a throat with equal ease. "I had to ensure I wasn't followed," Silas muttered. "The spire watches everyone now." Victor turned to him, pale eyes gleaming like ice under moonlight. "And yet you came. That tells me your conscience still whispers, old friend." "Don't call me that," Silas snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "You promised this would be clean. No blood." Victor smiled thinly. "All wars begin with a drop. The difference is whether you notice when it falls." He handed Silas a small vial, filled with liquid that shimmered faintly violet under the streetlight. "He trusts you. You pour this into his reserve." Silas took it, fingers trembling. "What will it do?" "Nothing he doesn't deserve," Victor said. "It will dull his strength, cloud his senses. The great Caspian Volov will be too weak to defend his precious tower when the order comes for the boy." Silas hesitated, the vial heavy in his palm. "He raised me from the gutter. Made me his voice when no one else dared stand beside him. And now he shelters the abomination that will doom your kind," Victor said softly. "Do not think of it as betrayal. Think of it as correction." The wind picked up, scattering rain across the street. Silas slipped the vial into his coat. "The UV grid?" he asked. Victor's smile widened. "Deactivate it from within. Once the sky burns red, the order will enter through the roof. The enemy is already inside, Silas. Make sure he stays blind until it's too late." Silas didn't answer. He simply walked into the rain, each step echoing like guilt. By dawn, the spire seemed to breathe more slowly. The sunlight filtered through tinted glass, pale and uncertain. Melissa was pouring tea when she noticed it, the faint flicker of the security lights near the kitchen door. The grid indicators, normally steady blue, blinked amber for a second, then stilled. "Power surge," she murmured. Silas appeared almost instantly, his usual grace oddly strained. "Just a fluctuation, Ms. Melissa. Nothing to be concerned about." His smile was practiced, but his eyes didn't match it. She had learned to read people from behind a diner counter, how liars looked just before the lie. Silas's hands were too still. She nodded slowly. "Of course." When he left, she noticed the faint smell lingering behind him, ozone and something metallic. Like old blood. That evening, Caspian dismissed the guards and withdrew to his private chamber. The room was lit by the soft pulse of the UV grid above, protecting the tower from any who might cross the line between light and shadow. A crystal decanter of deep crimson sat on his desk beside a book of ancient script. He poured a glass and drank. The taste was wrong. His hand froze halfway to the table, the glass slipping from his fingers. The liquid splashed against the floor like spilled rubies. His chest tightened, his vision blurring. The hum of the tower grew distant, replaced by a slow, rhythmic throb, the sound of his own faltering heart. Caspian gripped the edge of the desk, jaw locked against the weakness flooding his veins. He knew the sensation. Not poison. Not entirely. Something older. Something crafted for him. His gaze lifted toward the door. "Silas," he rasped. But the room was empty. He staggered toward the mirror, the reflection looking less like a king and more like a dying man. His eyes, once bright with amethyst fire, dimmed to violet smoke. He slammed his fist into the glass. It cracked but did not shatter. Melissa found Silas again near the control panels 2 floors above, his silhouette half-bathed in the blue light of the security grid. His hands moved over the console with a speed that didn't look like maintenance. "What are you doing?" she asked. He froze. The light cast his face in shifting shades of guilt. "Routine check," he said, too quickly. She took a step closer. "You said that this morning." He turned, and for the first time, she saw the fear in his eyes, not of her, but of something larger. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. Melissa's stomach twisted. The panels beside him flickered again, and she caught sight of a string of code flashing across the screen, manual override. Her voice hardened. "You're disabling the grid." Silas's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "You don't understand," he hissed. "If I don't do this, they'll kill us all." "Who?" Before he could answer, an alarm shrieked through the tower. The lights dimmed, the air thick with static. Silas's face turned pale. "Too late," he breathed. Melissa yanked free and ran for the elevator, heart pounding. The corridors pulsed red with warning lights as the grid overhead flickered, then died. The spire, the fortress that had kept them safe, was suddenly vulnerable. High above, thunder cracked. And from somewhere beyond the clouds, the sound of wings, vast, leathery, and many, rolled over the tower like a promise. Caspian, staggering from his chamber, felt the tremor in the air and knew before he saw the sky, the enemy wasn't coming. It was already here. The lights died with a single, shuddering pulse. For one breath, the spire held its silence, a cathedral of glass and shadow, and then the world broke. The hum of the UV grid vanished. The protective glow that had always filled the air dissolved into nothing. A low vibration moved through the tower, deep and terrible, as though the building itself had exhaled for the first time in centuries. Melissa froze in the corridor, her reflection flickering in the mirrored walls. "Rowan," she whispered. Then the glass exploded. A dozen black shapes descended from the storm outside, their lines slicing through the rain. They moved like insects, fast and precise, obsidian commandos, their armor glinting with crimson insignias. Ropes whipped against the windows as they crashed through in unison, landing with the grace of predators. Melissa ran. Down the hall, alarms blared long, shrieking tones that seemed to vibrate through her teeth. The scent of smoke and ozone filled the air. She turned a corner and nearly collided with Caspian. He looked different, pale, strained, his movements slower, the glow in his eyes dim. Poisoned blood had dulled the immortal edge that once made him untouchable. But still, even weakened, he radiated power like a dying star refusing to fade. "They are coming for the boy," he said, voice roughened with pain. Rowan's terrified cry echoed from the grand hall beyond. Melissa bolted toward it, Caspian close behind, though every step looked like agony. They reached the throne room, a vast chamber of marble and shadow, its high windows shattering one by one as the intruders poured in. The wind howled through the broken glass, scattering papers and the faint scent of burning oil. Rowan crouched behind one of the stone pillars, his small body shaking. Melissa lunged for him, scooping him into her arms. "Don't look," she said. "Don't look, baby." Caspian moved to the center of the room, his hand raised. "This is your only warning," he said, his voice low, dangerous. The commandos fanned out, black visors glinting. One stepped forward, his weapon humming with blue light. "By decree of the Obsidian Order, the hybrid is to be surrendered immediately." Caspian smiled, a small, terrible thing. "You think to take my bloodline by force?" The soldier fired. A beam of ultraviolet energy lanced through the room, searing a line across the marble floor. Caspian staggered, then turned the air itself into a weapon, dark tendrils coiling from the shadows, striking with feral precision. Two soldiers hit the ground, armor cracking like eggshells. But it cost him. Each movement was slower, each breath heavier. The poison had crawled deep. His power flickered, fighting against itself. Melissa saw it, the tremor in his hand, the strain in his jaw, and something primal awoke in her. She grabbed the nearest object from the desk, a silver letter opener shaped like a dagger, and turned as another commando lunged from behind. He was 3 times her size, armor gleaming. She didn't think. She drove the blade up beneath his visor. The silver hissed as it met flesh. The man fell wordlessly, smoke rising from the wound. Her hands shook, but she didn't let go of the weapon. Caspian met her eyes briefly across the chaos. There was no time for words, but his expression, pride, grief, warning, was enough. Another blast rocked the room. Rowan screamed as debris rained down, shards of glass catching in his hair. Caspian threw up a shield, a shimmer of violet energy that buckled under the assault. Melissa pulled Rowan behind the throne, crouching low. "Stay down," she whispered, pressing her body over his. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The air crackled. The soldiers regrouped, forming a semicircle. From their ranks stepped a figure without armor. Victor Kale. He moved with the ease of someone who had already won. His long coat fluttered in the storm wind, eyes cold as polished steel. "End this," Caspian said, voice shaking but steady. Victor tilted his head. "Oh, Caspian. You always did mistake defiance for strength." He glanced at the shattered grid above. "I told you, the world doesn't need kings of night anymore. It needs shepherds. And every shepherd knows when to slaughter the sick lamb." His gaze found Melissa and the boy behind her. "Give me the abomination." Caspian stepped forward, swaying slightly. "You will not touch him." Victor smiled. "You can barely stand." Caspian bared his teeth. "Try me." He struck first, dark energy surging from his palm, smashing into Victor's chest. The force sent the other man reeling, but he only laughed, straightening, his coat smoking at the edges. "Still the old tricks," Victor said. "But you're fading, my king." Caspian's knees buckled, his breath catching in his throat. The poison's grip was tightening. He sank to one knee, the glow in his eyes flickering like dying embers. Melissa rose from behind the throne, silver blade in hand. "Stay away from him." Victor's gaze slid to her, curious. "You must be the human." His tone was almost tender. "He gave up eternity for you. I can't decide if that makes you extraordinary or a curse." She lifted the blade higher. "Try me and find out." For the briefest second, he smiled. So much fire in such fragile flesh. A sound cut through the tension, a soft hum. The air around Rowan shimmered faintly. The boy's eyes, wide and terrified, were beginning to glow. Objects near him, shards of glass, fragments of marble, rose into the air, spinning in orbit around his small hands. Victor's composure slipped. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." Caspian forced himself upright, pain etched into every line of his face. "Yes," he rasped. "Now." The storm outside surged, lightning crashing against the spire's crown. The room filled with a blinding violet light, Rowan's power spilling out like dawn breaking through stone. For a heartbeat, the shadows fled. When it cleared, the throne room was a ruin. Smoke curled from the shattered walls. The soldiers were gone or scattered like dust. Only Victor remained, standing in the haze, his coat torn, his expression unreadable. He met Caspian's gaze one last time. "You can't hide him forever." Then he vanished into the storm, leaving silence in his wake. Caspian collapsed, the poison winning its battle at last. Melissa ran to him, pressing her hands against his chest, feeling the faint pulse struggling beneath cold skin. "What do we do?" she whispered, looking between him and the boy who had just saved them both. Caspian's eyes fluttered open, dim but alive. His voice was barely a breath. "We prepare," he said. Because this was only the beginning. The storm had not ended. It had only gathered its fury above the spire, curling black clouds around the tower's broken crown. Lightning flashed through the ruined windows, casting everything in stark white light, too bright, too violent to feel real. Melissa barely had time to breathe before the sound hit her, a soft displacement of air, like silk tearing. Then Victor Kale was there again, stepping from the smoke as though he had been waiting for the cue. His eyes burned cold and patient. "You think this is finished?" he said. His voice was smooth, unhurried. "It's only ever been about him." He moved before she could react. In a blur of motion, his hand closed around Rowan's arm and yanked him away from her. The boy screamed, kicking, his small fists glowing faintly as panic ignited something deeper within. "Let him go," Melissa cried, hurling herself forward. Kale's backhand sent her sprawling across the marble floor. Blood filled her mouth, metallic and warm. Caspian staggered upright, still pale from the poison, but his eyes snapped open, sharp as the blade of a god. "Kale." The name rolled through the air like thunder. Kale smiled faintly, dragging Rowan closer, one hand gripping the boy's chin. "You should have let your bloodline die, Caspian. The age of monsters ends tonight." Rowan's eyes opened wide, and they weren't violet anymore. They were white, pure and blinding, light without mercy. The sound that followed was not human. It wasn't even sound, it was pressure, raw and absolute. A psychic scream ripped through the tower. Every pane of glass shattered, a rain of glittering shards cascading through the air. The commandos still crawling through the wreckage convulsed, blood streaming from their ears. The walls themselves trembled. Kale roared, throwing up an arm to shield his face, but the force drove him backward, loosening his grip on the boy. Rowan dropped to the ground, dazed but alive. The room fell into chaos. Caspian turned, seizing the nearest soldier who still moved. His fangs extended, sharp and glistening, his pupils narrowing into slits. He sank his teeth deep into the man's throat, drawing life back into himself in slow, shuddering gulps. The soldier's body went limp, gray, empty. When Caspian rose again, the weakness was gone. Power rippled beneath his skin, his shadow spreading unnaturally wide. The air darkened around him, a gravitational pull of dread and awe. His features sharpened, stretching beyond human shape, cheekbones like carved obsidian, veins glowing faintly violet beneath translucent skin. His coat tore as wings erupted from his back, vast and leathery, dripping with shadow. Melissa, trembling against the far wall, could only stare. She had seen glimpses of what he was, fragments of an ancient predator hidden beneath grief and restraint. But this was not the king of the Night Court. This was the lord of it. Kale's smile faltered. "So the beast still breathes." Caspian's voice rolled out low and steady, vibrating the very air. I am not just a king, he said, wings unfurling, eyes blazing like twin suns of violet fire. I am a grandfather. He moved. One instant he stood at the center of the room. The next, he was behind Kale, faster than light, claws slicing through air and flesh alike. Kale spun, blade flashing from his wrist, striking upward. Steel met shadow in a burst of sparks. They collided again, a blur of motion and violence. Caspian's wings swept outward, shattering columns. Kale ducked beneath one strike, slammed a glowing dagger into Caspian's ribs, twisting it until smoke rose from the wound. Caspian hissed, grabbed Kale's arm, and broke it cleanly. You've grown sloppy, Kale spat, his smile twisted with pain. Caspian drove him backward, every movement fueled by centuries of rage. You mistake mercy for weakness. He slammed Kale into a pillar, cracking stone, his claws digging deep. And you mistake blood for sin. Kale struck back, shadows coiling around his hand like venom. He is not meant to exist. Caspian's roar drowned out the storm. He is mine. They crashed through the throne dais, splintering marble and firelight. Kale swung wildly, slicing one of Caspian's wings, black blood spilling like ink. Caspian didn't stop. He lunged forward, his fangs gleaming, his claws plunging straight into Kale's chest. Kale froze. His eyes went wide, disbelief overtaking fury. Caspian's voice dropped to a whisper, colder than death itself. You do not touch my blood. He tore Kale's heart free with a single, brutal pull. The sound that followed was the sound of endings, of something ancient unraveling. Kale's body convulsed, the veins in his face glowing bright, then collapsing into ash that scattered across the floor. The heart in Caspian's hand turned to dust, carried away by the storm wind pouring through the shattered windows. For a long moment, silence reigned. The battle's echo faded into the night, leaving only the hiss of rain. Caspian stood still, chest heaving, wings spread wide. Then, slowly, they began to fold, melting back into shadow. His features softened, the monstrous grandeur receding until only the man remained, the pale, weary sovereign, breathing as though he'd carried the world and just set it down. Melissa crawled toward Rowan, gathering the boy into her arms. His eyes were normal again, wide and frightened. Caspian turned to them, blood streaking his face, his expression unreadable. It's over, she said, her voice shaking. Caspian looked toward the window, where lightning still flickered like the heartbeat of a dying god. No, he murmured. It has only begun. He walked to the shattered throne, the wind pulling at his torn coat. Behind him, the city lights burned below like stars fallen to earth, and in the reflection of the glass, Melissa could still see the faint shadow of wings. He lifted his gaze to the storm and whispered, not to her, not to Rowan, but to the ghosts that watched them all. My blood endures. The dawn that rose over the spire was the color of smoke and blood. Clouds hung low, heavy with the remnants of the storm. The city below was still, dazed in the aftermath of something it didn't yet understand. The tower's shattered windows caught the pale light, shards glittering like tears. Inside, silence replaced battle. The marble floors were scorched and cracked, the scent of iron still clinging to the air. Servants moved quietly through the wreckage, sweeping away ash and debris as if tidying after a dream they wished to forget. In the center of the throne room stood Silas. His face was gray, his eyes hollow. Chains of silver wrapped his wrists, faintly smoking against his skin. Caspian sat before him, slouched in his throne, one hand gripping the armrest as if to anchor himself to the world. His strength had returned, slowly, cruelly, but his expression was carved from stone. You were family, Caspian said at last, his voice low, weary. And yet you chose to open my gates to my enemies. Silas's lips trembled. They would have killed us all. Kale said he would spare the child. Caspian rose, the movement fluid and terrible. Kale was incapable of mercy. And you were incapable of faith. The room darkened, the lights dimming as shadows stirred at the edge of his voice. Melissa stood near the wall, Rowan clinging to her hand. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. There was no triumph in Caspian's eyes, only grief twisted into something unbreakable. "Please," Silas whispered. "Forgive me." Caspian stepped closer. "If I forgive you," he said softly, "then every soul who died under this roof will haunt me forever." He reached out and Silas flinched, not from pain, but from understanding. The king's touch was cold, gentle almost, as he laid his palm against his advisor's forehead. "I release you," Caspian murmured. Light flared, violet and blinding. When it faded, only ash remained, scattered across the cracked marble floor. No one spoke. Caspian stood motionless for a long moment, his shadow long and dark against the wall. Then he turned away, shoulders heavy beneath the weight of what he'd done. "Clean this," he told the guards. His voice was flat, almost human. When he finally looked toward Melissa, his eyes softened. "You and the boy should rest. The danger has passed." She didn't believe that. Not entirely. But she nodded, guiding Rowan out of the hall, her hand trembling in his. Days passed. The tower healed itself the way all living things do, slowly, unevenly, with scars that refused to fade. The windows were replaced, the halls restored. Caspian slept little, spending most nights alone in the upper chambers, watching the city lights pulse beneath the clouds. Melissa found him there one evening, standing beside the great glass wall that overlooked the world. His reflection was ghost-pale against the night. "You're healing," she said softly. He gave a faint smile. "Am I?" "You're not coughing up blood anymore," she said. "That's progress." He huffed something like a laugh. A low bar for immortality. They stood in silence for a while. Then he turned to her, eyes unreadable. "You've lost much. I can give you a way out." Her chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Caspian gestured to a small box on the table beside him. It gleamed black and gold, heavy with promise. "Inside is enough to buy land, ships, perhaps even a crown. If you leave now, no one will ever find you. The order is broken. You and the boy could vanish." Melissa's throat went dry. "And if we stay?" He looked back toward the window, where the city stretched endlessly below. "Then you will live as my kin, under my protection, in a world that will never love you, but will learn to fear you." She turned, eyes searching the room until they fell on Rowan. He sat at the foot of the throne, small and solemn, his hands turning a black chess piece over and over. The king's piece. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he would. Melissa walked toward him, brushing his hair gently from his forehead. "You're quiet tonight." Rowan looked up. "Do we have to leave?" She felt something tighten behind her ribs. "No," she said. "Not if you don't want to." He smiled faintly and placed the chess piece on the seat of the throne. "Then we can stay here." Melissa looked back at Caspian. His gaze was heavy, but something inside it had changed, softer now, almost hopeful. "He needs to know who he is," she said quietly. Caspian nodded once. "Then you'll stay." It wasn't a question. The spire rose higher than the clouds that night, the city below a sea of light and shadow. Caspian stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at his coat. Beside him, Rowan leaned against the railing, small fingers clutching the cold metal. The boy's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, violet and curious. "What is that?" Rowan asked, pointing at the sprawl of lights below. Caspian followed his gaze, and for a long moment he didn't answer. Then, slowly, he smiled, a real smile, weary and proud. "That," he said, "is your kingdom, Rowan." The boy tilted his head. "It's big." Caspian rested a hand on his shoulder, the gesture uncharacteristically tender. "It is. And one day it will know your name." Melissa watched from the doorway, the wind lifting her hair. Caspian looked at the child beside him, this impossibility, this air born from love and rebellion, and felt something he hadn't felt in centuries: purpose. He lifted his gaze to the horizon, where dawn was beginning to break through the last remnants of storm. They will come again, he said, half to himself. They always do. Rowan glanced up at him, eyes bright. Then what will we do? Caspian's hand tightened slightly on the boy's shoulder. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of thunder. We will make them fear it. The wind swept across the balcony, carrying the first light of morning. It touched the tower's black glass, turning it gold for just a moment, an illusion of warmth, of peace. Below, the city stirred, unaware that a new reign had begun. And above, in the spire that pierced the clouds, the last king of the night stood beside his heir, the blood of two worlds bound by a promise that would outlast them both. The light faded. The storm, for now, was over. But the kingdom of shadows had found its future. If you love this story, show us your support. This was a long one, and your interaction tells me everything. Please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a dark romance, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. Let me know in the comments what part of this story was your favorite. Thanks for listening.